Now let's turn to a completely different story, a fascinating story, because New Zealanders are set to see dozens of their commonly used Maori words in the Oxford English Dictionary. More than 17% of New Zealand's population are of Maori descent. This move by Oxford English Dictionary is to recognise the profound and lasting impact the Indigenous tongue has had on New Zealand's language. Well, I'm pleased to say that Danica Salazar, the World English editor for Oxford English Dictionary, is joining us here live on the programme. Thank you so much for your time. This is an absolutely fascinating story. So just give us a flavour of some of these words that have made it now into the dictionary.
Well, yes, we've just added a nice selection of words of Maori origin in the OED. So that includes words like koha, meaning a gift, or korero means to talk or to hold a discussion. And also words like kaumatoa, which means an elder in a community, or whenua, meaning land, or whanau, meaning family, and ihoa, which is a meaning friend, so term of address used for someone's friend.
Tell me a little more about why you chose those words to include in the dictionaries.
We've chosen those words because we found them to be used of enough frequency in New Zealand English. So here in the Oxford English Dictionary, we use a digital collection of texts to track those words that are used, that are characteristic of certain varieties of English. And when we look specifically at the English language that as it is used in New Zealand, we found that a lot of words coming from the Maori language have now become part of everyday language in the country. And many of them are used not just by Maori people or in Maori context, but generally among all people who live in New Zealand.
Yes, so they've become general use throughout the entire population, haven't they? You've also included words that are becoming colloquial, that have got into the wider languages as well there in New Zealand. Just take me through some of those.
Yeah, so for instance, a word like kiora, which is a greeting, it actually has been in the OED since the 1970s, but we see it in more wide usage in New Zealand now, and it's also used alongside other new words that we've added. So, for example, ihoa. So people just usually greet their friends by saying kia ora ihoa, or the word koha, for instance. So what's interesting about the OED is that it's a historical dictionary. So we actually trace the actual usage of words from the very first evidence of use in English up to today. And so, for instance, if you see like a word like koha, we first found it being used in written text in Carrie Hume's book, The Bone People, which was published in 1984. And then just 10 years later, we found it being widely used even in newspapers and magazines, and without any kind of translation at all. So meaning that people in New Zealand already use this word and it doesn't need to be explained to them.
It's really interesting because we all know that language evolves all of the time, but I'm fascinated in terms of the English dictionaries, in terms of how often are you evolving and updating like this?
So the OED is actually updated 4 times a year. So now that it's available online, it's actually possible for us to update the dictionary that often. So words from New Zealand and even words of Maori origin do come into the dictionary as part of these regular updates. But what is different with this particular update is that we've actually looked specifically at New Zealand English. So we did an editorial project in which we focused on New Zealand English and found all of this evidence for Maori words being used in this variety. So that's why this is a particularly large batch of New Zealand English words and Maori words that are being added to the OED at this point.